Tonight, we're examining a development that lays bare the Kremlin's growing desperation and highlights the extraordinary resilience within Kyiv. What has transpired over the past 48 hours goes far beyond routine diplomatic back and forth official statements or another cycle of propaganda. This is something deeper, something that reveals the true state of affairs. The Kremlin has issued a demand. Ukraine must pull back its troops, cease its operations, halt its advances, and accept a new boundary of Russian control. In short, Russia is insisting that Ukraine retreat. Kyiv's answer, however, was not delivered through speeches, press briefings, or negotiations. Instead, Ukraine responded with decisive military action, real, strategic maneuvers that speak louder than any diplomatic statement ever could. Before we continue, if you value fact-based, unfiltered coverage of events like these, without the noise or propaganda that often clouds international news, be sure to subscribe and enable notifications. We bring you the latest developments as they happen. Now, let's break down what's really going on. On the surface, the Kremlin's demand almost seems absurd. Russia is telling Ukraine to withdraw as if Ukraine is the aggressor, as if Ukraine is occupying Russian land, when in reality, it's Russia occupying Ukrainian territory. Yet, Moscow presented this as an ultimatum, insisting Ukraine must pull back, stop advancing near key cities, stop striking Russian positions, and accept what they call new territorial realities. In essence, Russia is demanding Ukraine stop defending its own country. But beneath this demand lies something more significant: fear. Russia doesn't issue ultimatums from a position of strength. These demands come when Moscow feels cornered, exposed, and unable to change the situation on the ground. That's exactly what's happening now. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces have made steady, meaningful progress on several fronts. Western analysts describe this as gaining positional advantage, not dramatic breakthroughs, but consistent gains that threaten Russian supply routes, expose weaknesses in Russian defenses, and disrupt their offensive plans. These are the kinds of moves that keep Moscow's leadership up at night, not because they're flashy, but because they're effective. Instead of adapting or reinforcing their positions, the Kremlin has turned to political pressure, demanding Ukraine retreat. Kyiv's response, however, was not political, it was military. Late last night, Ukrainian forces launched a series of coordinated operations that caught Russian military bloggers and Kremlin officials off guard. These actions were not symbolic or random, they were calculated and strategic, sending a clear message: Ukraine will not retreat, Ukraine is advancing. Let's look at what Kyiv actually did, because this is where the story becomes remarkable. First, Ukrainian artillery ramped up strikes on major Russian ammunition depots supporting heavily fortified positions in the east. These weren't minor outposts, they were critical logistical hubs. When Ukraine targets them, Russian operations slow. When they're destroyed, Russian offensives grind to a halt. Second, Ukrainian drone units carried out a wave of successful nighttime attacks on Russian infantry positions, using advanced FPV drones, long-range loitering munitions, and ground-launched systems that bypass Russian defenses. They targeted communication centers, armored vehicle clusters, and newly constructed trenches, forcing Russian troops to withdraw from several areas. Third, Ukraine redeployed a significant number of armored vehicles to a frontline sector Russia considered secure, a move that caught Russian intelligence by surprise and forced Moscow to shift resources from other vulnerable areas, weakening their overall defense. Fourth, Ukrainian special forces executed a series of raids on Russian observation posts, operating swiftly and with precision. Some Russian positions controlling key terrain simply disappeared overnight. Together, these actions sent a powerful message to Moscow: Ukraine will not back down on the battlefield or at the negotiating table. But the real story isn't just about these maneuvers, it's about the mindset behind them. The Kremlin believed that by issuing threats and projecting dominance, it could intimidate Ukraine into stopping its operations. Kyiv, however, responded with strength and strategy, understanding a crucial lesson: if Ukraine pauses, Russia will use that time to regroup and strike again. Ukraine has learned that Russia does not respect ceasefires or pauses. Every lull is used to prepare for the next assault. Kyiv's message is clear: there will be no pause. Now let's turn to Moscow. The Kremlin's demand is not a sign of confidence, but of anxiety. Russia is under immense internal pressure. Losses are mounting, elite units are depleted, equipment and ammunition are running low, and repeated offensives have stalled. Politically, the leadership is struggling to control the narrative. Russian society is feeling the strain, families are frustrated by mobilization, soldiers' relatives are protesting online, and even military bloggers are openly criticizing the Ministry of Defense and, in some cases, Putin himself. In this environment, the Kremlin needed to project strength, so it issued a demand for Ukraine to retreat. But demands don't change the facts on the ground, reality does. And the reality is grim for Russia. Ukraine is adapting, improving, exploiting Russian weaknesses, expanding its operational reach, integrating new Western weapons, and learning faster than Russia can adjust. Moscow is well aware of this. That's why the Kremlin's demand is so telling, not because Ukraine would ever comply, but because it shows how out of touch Moscow is with the battlefield situation. A government that thinks it can end military pressure with demands is one that has lost its grip on reality. Kyiv's response was therefore brilliant. Instead of engaging in debate or giving Moscow a propaganda win, Ukraine answered with action, military pressure, tactical gains, and strategic advances that force Russia to confront the truth, not the fiction shown on state TV. Washington has noticed this as well. Senior U.S. officials have privately described the Kremlin's demand as a sign of weakness. As one Pentagon official put it, "You don't ask your enemy to stop advancing unless you're worried about where things are headed." Another noted, Russia is feeling the pressure. Their defenses are cracking. The State Department has said Ukraine's refusal to yield is exactly what was expected. Ukraine will not retreat, not because of threats or pressure, and certainly not because Moscow demands it. Analysts are calling this a turning point, perhaps a subtle one, but a turning point nonetheless. Moscow's diplomacy is usually about pretending the war is going as planned, not about telling Ukraine what to do. If things were going well for Russia, they wouldn't need to make demands. They'd simply achieve their objectives. Demands come from anxiety, not strength. What Russia fears most is losing control, not just of territory, but of momentum. Let's also consider Kyiv's political response, which is just as important as its military actions. Ukraine has stepped up diplomatic outreach across Europe, holding meetings in Warsaw, Berlin, Vilnius, and London to make it clear. Ukraine will not retreat and will fight until all occupied territory is liberated. President Zelensky held an emergency call with U.S. officials, reaffirming that Ukraine will not be pressured by Russian demands, a stance Washington publicly supported. Meanwhile, Ukraine's parliament passed measures to streamline military procurement, boost support for frontline units, and strengthen the wartime economy, signaling preparation for prolonged operations. The military command also announced new rotations, deployments, and operational plans to increase pressure along the front. All of this demonstrates that Ukraine is not simply reacting, it is acting with strategy, intention, and confidence. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is trying to spin its demand as a peace offer, claiming it wants to prevent further bloodshed. But this is the same Kremlin that started the war, continues to bombard cities, and suppresses dissent at home. Their demand lacks credibility, and Kyiv knows it. There's also a deeper psychological dimension to the Kremlin's demand. Putin is known for projecting strength and control, but this demand was different, uncertain, lacking confidence. Behind the scenes, his inner circle is divided. Some want escalation, others negotiation. Some want to freeze the lines, others to push harder. Putin is caught between these factions, resulting in mixed messages. Threats one day, ultimatums the next, followed by silence. This inconsistency signals a leadership losing its grip, and Kyiv recognizes the weakness. Ukraine sees a fractured Russian government, exhausted troops, flawed planning, and an opportunity for both military and political advantage. That's why Ukraine's military actions following the Kremlin's demand were so significant. They weren't just tactical, they were psychological blows, reminders that it's Russia, not Ukraine, that is struggling. Wars are not won solely on the battlefield, but also in minds, strategies, and perceptions. When one side shows cracks and the other displays strength, momentum shifts. Tonight, that momentum is shifting. Ukraine is not retreating, not slowing down, and not buckling under pressure. And despite all its propaganda, Moscow knows it. This conflict is far from over, but right now, Ukraine is calling the Kremlin's bluff, refusing to yield to pressure and answering political demands with military strength. As long as Ukraine continues to act strategically, intelligently, and relentlessly, the Kremlin's demands will remain empty. Demands are powerless when the other side refuses to comply. This war will not be decided by ultimatums, but by action, and tonight, it's Ukraine that is taking action. Stay with us.